The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
Cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Cives Romani, as the citizens of the Roman Empire were called. But what about the life of the Civis Americana under the banner of the Democrat trifecta? Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio, production of LibertyNation.com, heard from coast to coast on the Radio American network. I'm Mark Angelides, and I'll be sitting in the host chair for Tim Donner this week. So, Democrats have the trifecta, the White House, occupied by President Joe Biden, an effective majority in the Senate thanks to VP Kamala Harris's deciding vote, and a slim majority in the House of Representatives. How has this been working out for Americans? We'll be examining how your rights and liberties are faring under this executive and legislative powerhouse. Also, what's happening with the abandoned children at the border? And how much longer can that be a Trump blame game? We're also discussing how justices are for life, not just for Christmas, or for when it's politically expedient. And finally, our panel today will be looking at the Great American Exodus. Liberty is in a U-Haul. Oregonians want to join the Greater Idaho. Blue states are hemorrhaging people, everyone going to Florida. And with New York City now open for business, is there anyone left to actually spend their dollars there? I'm joined today by Scott D. Cosenza, Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Graham Noble, our chief political correspondent and in-house satirist, and Mr. Andrew Moran, economics correspondent and general Nostradamus of all things fiscal. Has the Democrat trifecta impacted Americans for better or for worse? Does the average Joe and Jill feel their rights, their liberties, and of course their wallets have fared better now that large swaths of Democrat-led legislation is passed into law? Scott, as a constitutional lawyer, let's start with you. How are liberties in the Democrat empire?
Mark, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty because they are under constant assault, and they are currently under constant assault. I would say that whether, pick the hot button issue you want, it's bad news for liberty, with the possible exception of people who are pro-choice would see an expansion of liberty from the Democrats in power, although the Supreme Court just announced they're taking an abortion case that may go the other way and reverse Roe v. Wade, which I'm sure we might talk about later. So the challenges are plenty. I think that gun control is where the most headlines are going to come from soon. Joe Biden has been animated against the right to keep and bear arms pretty much his entire career, and a leader in trying to restrict the right of law-abiding gun owners to have guns.
And Graham, do you feel that Democrats are respecting your rights?
No, I don't feel that way at all. And I think it comes down to the fundamental principles at the heart of left-wing political philosophy is that always the so-called common good must always supplant the rights of the individual. You know, individual freedoms are always expected to be sacrificed because apparently that makes society as a whole a better place. I've never quite understood where the logic in that thinking is, but that is at the heart of left-wing philosophy. I think certainly, it's we're not that far into the Biden administration. I don't think it would be fair to say right now that suddenly Americans are a whole lot less free than they were, say, a year ago or maybe 2 years ago, because none of us were free last year, of course, because of the pandemic. But I think certainly, we are on the cusp of losing all kinds of freedoms. And I don't think that should be taken lightly. I think it's a very serious problem. And I also think, by the way, that the states themselves are on the cusp of losing their freedoms. I think if the people that are currently running the country right now had their way, our existence as a republic itself would be under threat because they want the central government to have more power over the states. So yeah, it's not a good prospect right now.
Yeah, that's a very contentious issue, isn't it? The states' rights over the federal rights. And I think that's something that we're going to be looking at a lot more in future on libertynation.com. Now, Andrew, you, as our man on all things fiscal and economic, what are your thoughts? Are Americans going to be richer, poorer? And I mean this in a financial sense and perhaps even a spiritual sense. What are your thoughts?
Well, we're all spiritually insolvent in this era. But, if you belong to the something for nothing society, I think you're going to be a lot wealthier. Now, I'm pretty sure people are going to be confused by that, by saying, how can all this spending make us wealthier? But consider this. I recently did a Swamponomics video talking about how President Biden is making Americans addicted to the government. I based this supposition on the latest personal income transfer payments. Now, this is a metric that monitors everything you get from the state, whether it's jobless benefits, welfare payments, child payments, whatever the case. It topped $8 trillion in March. Now, that's more than double from the same time last year. So everyone's getting richer if you're taking more from the government. If you're at a net loss, too bad for you. And it's just getting started under Bidenomics. So even seemingly many Republicans, based on some of their proposals, you're getting guaranteed annual income if you have children. You're getting free college. You're getting free childcare. You're getting free this. You're getting free that. So if you're someone who's relied on the government for income and has hardly contributed to the system after all these years, you're going to be a lot wealthier than ever before. Unfortunately for the Americans who actually pay for this stuff and contribute to the system and hardly get anything from Uncle Sam as it is, they're the ones who are going to be a lot poorer. And plus, when you have the inflation tax, a lot of people are a lot worse off than before.
The discussion of inflation as a tax on the people, I think, is underused by across the media. I'm guilty of it myself. I think, I think that most people are fundamentally ignorant of how that mechanism works to tax them.
Oddly enough, we will be discussing that later on in the show. It's a major point, Scott, and one well worthy of address. Actually, Scott, while I got you here, I'd like to come back to you quickly and ask you what you see or what you think is coming down the pipeline. What can we expect to see as Democrats hold on to the reins of power, at least until the 2022 midterms? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they have to try to get everything in that they will not be able to get in if the House goes Republican, which the smart money bet is it will, not because of any particular insight I have, except that that's how our political cycles usually work, is that the party in power loses seats in the midterm elections. In fact, there are political scientists who say that part of the problem is referring to them as the midterm elections. They're not the midterm for anybody except for the president. The congressional elections occur every 2 years. So they're just the proper term elections for Congress. So anyway, the Democrats, they have a wish list. They want to get, the maximum amount they can, presumably before the Republicans come in and make that much less likely to be successful. So obviously I pay a lot of attention to gun control issues. For instance, will almost be impossible to get any new gun controls through Congress if there's a Republican House. So the question then becomes, I think, in that area, what's the maximum they can get in terms of whether it be an assault weapons ban or more taxes or the banning of certain types of technology that are used in firearms?
Yeah, it's a good point you make there. I think in the last 80 to 100 years, I think that there's only been 3 occasions when the sitting party has increased their House majority. And of course, there's redistricting coming up in light of the recent census. So that really setting the cat among the pigeons, especially I believe it's a major advantage on the redistricting this time. I think it's 184 or 187 redistricting opportunities for the Republicans compared to about 60 or 70 for the Democrats. I think a lot of this will depend on how the economy is going, especially whether Democrats do hold on to any real power during the midterms. And that's really how the economy is going, isn't it? So, Andrew, are we about to see a major issue with inflation, or will it just be that what do you call it, an ephemeral creature known as transitory inflation, which I thought was a wonderful use of Orwellian-style language.
Yeah, it's remarkable. The Federal Reserve, for so long, they were saying inflation's not going to happen. It's not going to be here. And then around January, February, they started saying, well, inflation could be here, but it's transitory. And now, and I think it was last month, the White House said, oh, yeah, the Federal Reserve is right. It is transitory. It's going to be a blip on the radar. But it's silly. Consider this fact. So 1/4 of all U.S. dollars ever printed were created in just the last year. Now that's $4 trillion. It's asinine to think that it's just transitory, like the Fed and the White House keep saying. And what's even more terrifying is that the Biden administration just plans to keep on spending trillions of dollars more. With he has his 2-part infrastructure program, which is just anything is infrastructure according to the administration. And his plan is to have a corporate tax rate of 25 to 28%. He has a capital gains tax. And what's hilarious is that he plans to pay for all of this in just 15 years. So he has a 7-year spending plan. He plans to pay for it in 15 years. It doesn't make any sense. So your life is getting a lot more expensive under the Biden administration.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. And we'll be back after these short messages. We'll be discussing kids at the border. Is it all it seems to be?
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com. With one click, you get tomorrow's news today with LNTV's Hot Topics and Analysis, Liberty Nation Radio, The Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts, and dozens of insightful original articles. And now, you can keep your kids ahead of the curve with LNGenZ.com. LN Gen Z brings a free-thinking education right into your home for students of every grade level with articles, videos, worksheets, and ready-to-go curriculum. While the media establishment giants are sleeping, you can stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. LibertyNation.com.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
I'm Mark Angelides, sitting in the host chair for Tim Donner this week. Children separated from their families at the border. Or are they? With the news that 391 kids have yet to be reunited with their families, according to the majority of the media, because of President Trump's policies, it's time to point out the obvious that both politicians and the Fourth Estate seem determined to ignore. Helping us to tackle this are Scott Cosenza, Andrew Moran, and Graham Noble. Gentlemen, I can't help thinking that the parents of these almost 400 children know where they are, so that there must be some issue in them going to collect these children. I'm left with the feeling that either some of these folks might not even want their kids back, or perhaps, and here's the unspoken thing that's making the rounds, perhaps some of these children were bought, borrowed, stolen, or in fact rented for the express purpose of crossing the southern border. Graham, am I paranoid or am I missing something here?
No, I don't necessarily think you're missing anything, Mark. I think any of those very unpalatable options about what happened to these children could be right. When it comes to talking about the border, it amazes me that, especially for people on the left who pretend to be so compassionate and caring and all about human rights and human dignity and all of those kind of things, which are very important, but they apparently portray themselves as the champions of these things. And yet what is going on at the southern border is nothing less than the most extensive human trafficking operation in possibly the history of human civilization. And we're just allowing it to happen. And I find that incredible. I find it incredible that anybody is willing to continue with this policy of just allowing these people from Central America to flood across the border. And I'd like to add very briefly that, if I were in their position, I'd probably do the same thing. So it's not like I'm blaming them, but this is literally the crime of the century that's happening. And it's appalling.
Andrew, you write quite frequently about how incentivizing something leads to more of it, which seems like quite a simple concept to understand. Has the Biden administration incentivized people to bring kids, even if they aren't their own children?
Well, I think for the Biden administration, or at least for President Biden, it had been his words in the campaign trail that he essentially told everyone, come over here if you're fleeing poverty or fleeing anguish, whatever the case. And if you remember one of the Democratic debates, they asked, does your plan include free healthcare for illegal immigrants? Everyone on that stage raised their hand. So you had that type of incentive that encourages people to come from where it was South or Central America into the United States. Now, whether or not these comments were meant to, have woke progressive support in his campaign is moot, because now you have these huge numbers of people flooding the border wearing their Joe Biden T-shirts. And then that said, aside from Biden, you have state problems too. You have state policies that are having a greater impact on having these massive numbers of people crossing the border illegally. You have California giving free health care to young illegals who are under 25, and Texas, undocumented students qualify for in-state tuition. Cities and states have created these COVID funds to help legal and illegal immigrants. And now, and on the Republicans too, Republicans are not innocent on this. You have Caitlyn Jenner. She said she wants to offer amnesty to illegals in California, and that's coming from a Republican. A part of that supposedly is hard on immigration. And let's face it, they've been soft on illegal immigration until Trump came around. So I think all three levels of government are subsidizing legal immigration, not just Biden.
Now, Scott, I want to ask your opinion on this, because obviously you're the legal fellow here. So from a legal standpoint, do you have any idea what mechanisms are in place or are taking place to either reunite these kids, house them somewhere with dignity and a good chance of actually getting some kind of life, or to hunt down the people who, if my premise is correct, trafficked these children?
Those are very complicated things, all three of them. And there's no easy answer that I have for you that I can zero in on and say, yes, here's what's being done. I don't think there is a kind of, if you go to a police department in America and say my car was stolen, they're going to do certain things that are rote and how to investigate that. I don't know how you do that with a child that has appeared at the border who's a minor. It has to be case specific as to what they're saying. Did they come with an adult that's identifiable or not? What country they came from, what the infrastructure is like there to track a person down via their identity documents, cedula, or whatever they may have. So the answer is it's I think a Medusa's head rather than a clear path, Mark. I mean, it's who knows. As for the question about whether or not, what can we do to keep them comfortable, I think, the Obama cages that we see on the news, how many of those can you build if you are going to continue to welcome, people? And like you talked about the incentive process, if the more comfortable you make it, the sad truth is that the more likely you are to encourage more people who live in untenable conditions to send their kids up. And I stand with Graham. If I lived in a gang-ridden Honduran town, I would do whatever I could to make sure that my offspring got to the United States of America, including breaking any federal law to get them there because of the stark reality of where they are.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. And we'll be right back after this message. We'll be talking about the Supreme Court and Justice Stephen Breyer.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio. I'm Mark Angelides, sitting in the host chair for Tim Donner this week. I'm joined today by Scott D. Cosenza, Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Graham Noble, our chief political correspondent and in-house satirist, and Mr. Andrew Moran, economics correspondent. As the old animal welfare ads used to say, a Supreme Court justice is for life, not just for Christmas, or near enough. It seems that it's Christmas in the White House right now, and that the Biden family is unwrapping their presents and already looking for the return receipts for Justice Stephen Breyer. Scott, this is your neck of the woods. And clearly it's political expedience here to ask Justice Breyer to step down. Can it all be political?
It's exclusively about power, Mark. It's not just the Biden White House. It's also just the movement left generally. And they want to see a younger and more radical justice installed in the Supreme Court for the political benefit that's going to come from that exercise. They want a vote, a yes vote for their preferred policies and a no vote against the ones that they disfavor.
Graham, as Scott points out there, it does seem to be all about the power, who has it, who can wield it. Now, so far, based on an admittedly short time since there has been what we'd term a conservative majority in the Supreme Court, how conservative do you see the conservative justices being with their jurisprudence?
Well, I suppose that is a question that's open to an enormous amount of interpretation depending on one's perspective. My view has always been that I don't look at the Supreme Court in terms of how conservative or how liberal the opinions they issue are. I am only concerned with how true to the Constitution they are. And whether you want to, describe that in any particular case as liberal or conservative, I really don't care. I'm interested only in how loyal to the Constitution the Supreme Court remains. And I've always been, unfortunately, much more disappointed than pleased in most cases with Supreme Court rulings. Sometimes they surprise me, but most of the time I tend to think that the Supreme Court, supposedly conservative majority or not, is not particularly loyal to the Constitution as a body. I think people who rejoiced when Donald Trump was able to, put conservatives on the Supreme Court, I think many of them might be disappointed so far at the way the court has performed since then.
Mark, the Supreme Court just this week, the conservative justices voted, we presume the conservative justices voted to take an abortion case. And the reason why we presume that is because the lower court ruling favored abortion providers. So presumably it's 4 conservative justices. It takes 4 justices to vote to take a case that's been applied to the Supreme Court. And they said this week that they will take an abortion case to rule on whether or not it's permissible for states to regulate abortion or restrict abortion rights before viability, which it has not been under the current Roe v. Wade, Planned Parenthood v. Casey milestone rulings from the Supreme Court. So I think to your question, the Supreme Court justices that are conservative are feeling their conservatism now. Perhaps they think that with the addition of Amy Coney Barrett, they have a critical mass to go forward with some rulings.
That's something we will be keeping a very close eye on. And Andrew, as I'm sure you've noticed, the media, they're pushing a whole lot of, let's call them suggestive stories that Justice Breyer should step down gracefully. Now, how can they really, in your opinion, how can they look at themselves in the mirror after begging Justice Ginsburg to stay in position, despite her numerous bouts with cancer and all of her other physical ailments? I mean, really, how can these guys sleep at night?
Well, I'm just going to have to echo what Scott's been saying. It's all about power, but when it comes to power, I always like to compare the Supreme Court to the Federal Reserve System, and that, it's the most powerful and centralized institution, but at least there's term limits to a lot of these chairs. It's what's funny is that in the stock market, investors hang on to every word that emanates from the U.S. Central Bank, and it comes to the rest of the population. Everybody hangs on to every word coming from the Supreme Court. And, you have 300 million people hanging on to it, and you have 9 justices. That's what, 1 judge for every 40 million people. You have Breyer, Thomas, and Ginsburg who've been there since I was in pull-ups. So it's hard to believe that they can be connected to reality in any way. But, when it comes to picking or choosing Supreme Courts, it's not a hill I die on, maybe because I'm not a legal scholar like Scott is, and of course I'm not an American. But overall, the Supreme Court, I think it's an antiquated institution. I want more of a decentralized United States, not a concentrated body that that the country is so focused on just a handful of people in fancy robes who are just politicians in fancy robes, if I may quote Ryan McMakin of the Mises Institute.
Let me add, Mark, that there were plenty of people on the left who were not happy about Justice Ginsburg's decision to remain on the court during the time when Obama had the White House and the Democrats had the Congress. There were many people who said she needed to step down. She said no because she didn't think that her replacement would be sufficiently liberal enough. Of course, what she wasn't counting on was that the person that could have gotten through under Obama's leadership or presidency would have been radically more liberal than the conservative that Donald Trump appointed when she eventually did pass away in office. So I didn't want to leave the impression that was a solely, the pressure was all one way. Also, Donald Trump put feelers and pressure out to get Justice Thomas to resign, as a matter of fact. There were sort of stories that flared up. You can kind of read the writing on the wall when you see these stories like out of nowhere. Like, is Justice Thomas considering retiring? No, he's not. That was an attempt. Trump was successful, I think, in getting Anthony Kennedy to retire by kind of feeding him the notion that he would be pleased with his replacement, which I think he was. I don't think it was a false attempt. But it's done by all these presidents and the people who want to have a hand in shaping that power, and they can't do that with a justice that's currently seated on the court.
Yeah, I don't think Justice Thomas is ever going to retire, nor should he. He seems like he keeps the court invigorated, and the opinions are always entertaining, whether you agree with them or not. They're certainly spicy, which is, I think, what we like out of it's what I like out of Supreme Court justices. Now, Graham, in terms of
you and all the law students, Mark, that have to suffer through all the opinions, trust me on that one.
He's just not dry. That's what gets me about Thomas. He's just not dry. That the way he uses language, the way he explains the points. That there's always something there, especially as a newsman. There's always a great story hidden and woven in the words, which is not always the case with other justices. Graham, from a liberty standpoint, who's your favorite justice?
For my money, Samuel Alito appears to understand not only the spirit but the text of the Constitution probably better than anyone else on the court, really. And in fact, to be honest, I'd go even a step further in saying that other than Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas, I don't have a great deal of faith in anybody else on the Supreme Court.
All right, and Scott, as our lawyer on the team, who's your favorite?
I think that Gorsuch is going to develop into my favorite justice, but he's still a new guy, generally speaking. So for the breadth of their work on the Supreme Court, for me, it's Clarence Thomas. And while I appreciate his writings and I appreciate his understanding, it's about the votes for me. We talked a minute ago about how there's so few justices compared to the people in terms of representation wise. And it's even worse than that because there are probably 2.5 justices on either side that are going to always vote one way or another. So really you have these consequential issues about how we organize our affairs, life and death, abortion. These questions are decided by 2-3 people who are unelected and appointed for life. And that's nowhere in the founding documents does it suggest that was contemplated or that it's wise. So we have these 3 philosopher kings. It could be as few as 1. It was Sandra Day O'Connor for a while, the swing vote on the court kind of thing. So, that's my answer. I think that Justice Thomas usually writes opinions that I agree with. His reasoning is, I think, sound, and the result that he comes to is usually the one that favors the most freedom, which is what I'm always looking for: the protection of liberty and the protection of individual liberty against state power or other power coming from the Supreme Court. So Thomas for me.
Okay, and Andrew, I'm not going to ask you the same question because, as we know, you consider politicians in robes or dresses. But I do want to ask, what do you think of the idea of the appointment for life?
Yeah, I was researching about what Scott was just saying about these people who serve for life. And I think the closest thing I found was Alexander Hamilton. He said that, essentially you can serve for life if you're on good behavior. Now, these justices, I mean, they seem to be on good behavior. I don't agree with their policies. So, if I don't want someone to serve for life, they're out of touch. If you're serving there since, for 30, 40 years, what do you know about the common man? What do you know about what's going on in the world? You're stuck in a centralized body in the nation's capital. You're 80, 90 years old. What do you know what's going on?
All right, gentlemen, thank you very, very much for such an informative discussion. We'll be back after this break where we're talking about the blue state exodus, liberty in a U-Haul.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
I'm Mark Angelides, sitting in the host chair for Tim Donner this week. We're seeing a mass exodus of folks from blue states to red. Is it the weather or the political climate that's driving this movement? It certainly seems to be a case of liberty in a U-Haul for many Americans. Most recently, there was a vote by a number of Oregonians to cede from their state and join up with a Greater Idaho movement. They said that it was because of political alignment. To help us examine the ramifications of this are Scott D. Cosenza, Andrew Moran, and Graham Noble. Scott, could you give us some details on what procedures would be required for the Oregon counties to become part of a Greater Idaho? And also, whose authority is it under?
Mark, counties are the exclusive creation of the states where they are present. So any county in Oregon is a creation of the state of Oregon. And only at the state level can the change be made to, kind of abdicate governorship of the area in question. There's no self-determining right by county to go associate with a certain state. So it would require change at the state law level for that to happen. I suggest it's a bit fantastic to think that that's going to happen.
Just to follow up with you on that, Scott, if in some fantastical realm Oregon did agree to what these counties wanted, would it then still have to pass through Congress, the U.S. Congress?
That's an interesting question. I don't know that it's resolved.
Okay. So, Graham, since this effort and many others like it, it seems that it's just separating the country into red and blue. Now, clearly, as Scott pointed out, this probably isn't going to happen on this occasion, and the secession movement in California, North California, probably isn't going to happen. Is this something that could eventually lead to the dissolution of the Union?
I don't really believe that we're looking at the, for want of a better term, the balkanization of the United States, Mark. I really think that actually your average American, whether they vote Democrat or Republican or something else, doesn't really wish to see a situation in which we're divided into regions where you have a group of red states over here and a group of blue states over here, and never the twain shall meet. And there's we get to the point where we're cutting off interstate commerce and so on, which of course is a federal government issue anyway. So are we going down that kind of road? I really don't believe we are. I think there are certainly probably people on both sides who would perhaps like that, who would perhaps like where we just have some wider separation between the red states and the blue states. But of course, the reality of what's happening is that the population is in flux. We're talking about this exodus from blue states into red states. But of course, what happens is that those people and, who can understand this? None of us can understand. We all know what's going on, but we can't understand why these people leave certain states because they're not happy with the taxes or the political policies or maybe the homelessness problems or whatever else. They're just not happy with the politics in general in that state. So what do? They move to another state and then they vote for the same kind of policies. And that's the infuriating thing about it. So you're never really going to get that separation between blue and red states, because as long as the people from blue states keep moving to the red states and voting in the same way, you're never going to have that kind of separation. I mean, as it is, from a personal point of view, I'm in North Carolina, and I'm biting at the bit to leave this state precisely because it is being overrun on, more and more every day. It is being overrun by people from the Northeast who are moving into North Carolina, but they want, and then they want to turn North Carolina into another New Jersey or New York or Connecticut or whatever.
All right, Andrew, from a tax perspective, obviously this is a lot of what's driving the exodus from blue to red is taxation. Yeah. So especially places, people moving to Florida, anybody with a little bit of money that they want to hang on to more of, they're certainly heading into places that don't have an income tax. But does it surprise you as an economist that more people aren't doing this, moving to protect their wealth assets?
Well, surprisingly, over the last few months, I've been reporting on the exodus occurring in New York, and you would think that it's only the wealthiest Americans or the most successful companies like Goldman Sachs or these Wall Street trading firms that are moving down south. But when you look at the numbers, actually it's the middle class New Yorkers who are leaving the state and going to these low tax jurisdictions. So it's not just wealthy people doing it; a lot of people are doing it. And what I will say about the low income people in New York, they're actually benefiting somewhat from this, because when you have these rents collapsing in New York, they're actually save some money and move into these other places that have rent control. So this whole exodus is benefiting a lot of people. Now, as Graham said, the issue of these people who have liberal policies or liberal tendencies, and then they move somewhere else, and then they California that country, or that state, in New York that state. So you have that issue. So from a tax perspective, states that want to attract all sorts of people, not just the wealthy, they would benefit from having a pro-business agenda, lower taxes, fewer regulations. So it's that incentive. You want to incentivize a population growth in these states. Up here in Canada, if you look at Atlantic Canada for so long, people were leaving. There was a population exodus. There weren't any jobs. The economy was stagnant. Taxes were too high, but they shifted policies where they actually cut taxes and they impose fewer regulations. And now you have a healthy real estate market, and everyone's actually moving to Atlantic Canada. It's so attractive there, and people are blind bidding the properties. People are buying homes without even seeing them. So again, the liberals, they always claim about taxes, but they seem to like the taxes when they don't. They seem to like not paying taxes when they don't have to.
Yeah, it's the idea that an area can be reinvigorated by people moving out, it actually makes a lot of sense, because these people presumably had jobs or provided a service with whatever business they were doing. So when they go, that actually opens up a gap for somebody to kind of move up.
I'd also say, too, that with this whole pandemic and more companies adopting work-from-home policies, you're going to have these people where they don't have to move anymore to these big cities where all the jobs are. They can work for Goldman Sachs. They can work for Wells Fargo. They can work for any of these companies living in the Midwest or living in Florida or living in Georgia, because they can do their jobs from home. That's been one of the key benefits of the post-pandemic economy. That is, if these companies continue their telecommuting policies.
Graham, I want to swing back briefly to the topic of blue states, red states. As you say, you don't think there'll be a division, but one of the buzzwords that we've been hearing so much about for the last 4 or 5 months really is unity. And I'm not seeing a whole lot of unity. How about you?
No, not seeing a whole lot of unity either. I mean, this thing about the division between the states, the reason why I don't think that is going to happen is because of the interchange of population between these states. So, how long does a blue state stay blue before it starts moving purple and red? How long does a red state stay red before it starts moving purple and then blue? I think there's always going to be a certain amount of flux, and that's why I don't believe there's going to be any kind of cementing of divisions between certain states. However, I think we are less unified now than ever before, and I don't see that situation improving.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. And thanks to you at home for listening. And that's all we have time for this week on Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com. I'm Mark Angelides, standing in for Tim Donner this week. I thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.